Okay, let's talk a little bit about political landscape and demographics, which are very important in terms of how a state casts its electoral votes. A state's political landscape dictates where a candidate's resources, time, money, and effort should be most effectively deployed. It's unique based on its history, political culture, and traditions as reflected in the relative strength of the political parties in terms of control of the levels of power in each state. Governorship, state legislatures, and nationally in terms of the composition of its congressional delegation and Senate seats. This next chart reflects the pronounced skewing of the political landscape between 2008 and 2010, a big change election in favor of Republican office holders over the Democratic counterparts in swing states across a wide range of offices, including governorships, state legislative chambers, U.S. Senate seats, and congressional delegations. So let's look at that. We see that House delegations went from almost 10 out of 12 Democrats to 10 out of 12 Republicans. I'm sorry, yeah, and one split. Senators stayed relatively stable. There was just a difference of one seat in Tier 1 states and no changes or offsetting changes in Tier 2 and Tier 3. Similar to what happened with congressional delegations, and that's based on a majority of the delegation. Those letters are reflected. In assemblies and upper houses, let me get a little closer here. We had almost a wholesale turnover from in the state assemblies of swing states, 10 out of 12 Democrats to 9 out of 12 Republicans. In upper houses, we also had a turnover going from 4 Republican to 9. Among governorships, we had a wholesale change of governorships such that Democrats only retained one Tier 2 and one Tier 3 governorship. So this was a major shift, that 2010 election. Now going into 2012 to 2014, there was a little bit of reversal. Let's take a look at that change. Republicans actually increased their majority among congressional delegations to 11 out of 12. And whereas the Senates remained unchanged for Tier 1 and Tier 2, there was and Tier 3 between 2012 and 2014. Assemblies became more Republican, so that there were only 10 out of 12 swing state assemblies were in Republican hands, and 8 and 10 out of 12 upper chambers. There was Republicans made gains in Tier 3 governorships, lost some in Tier 2 and one in Tier 1. But overall, they retained most of what they gained in 2010. So this year's down ballot races will be critical in either reversing the trend or keeping it more or less intact. By contrast, demographics speak to the respective political strength of the two parties as measured by party affiliation, that is, registration, as well as the composition of the electorate in terms of its ethnicity, national origin, education, and income levels. So in terms of party registration and ethnic composition, we look at these tables. This is 2008, 2012, and if you look closely at these tables, you will see that there was dramatic increases in Hispanic and Asian Americans as a percentage of the population across the board between 2008 and 2012. It may be difficult for you to see these because they're quite small, but Hispanic Americans went, let's see, these top tier states went from 16.8 to 22, and Asian Americans went from 1.7 to 2.4. Percentage-wise, that's a large increase. That's in Florida. Pennsylvania, I think it's similar. Let's take a look. Is it 4.3 there? To 5.7, and then 1.8 to 2.7. So there's still small numbers, but significant increases percentage-wise. But these are especially the Asian Americans, are a very reliable demographic. And this was reflected in Obama's carrying the Hispanic vote in other states, Colorado and New Mexico as well. In terms of registration, Democrats held the edge in both Florida and Pennsylvania, doubling their advantage between 2008 and 2012. And the Republican advantage in registration also declined by 50% in Florida over the same period. Now, registration is only a partial indicator. A better metric is the likely voter, and that requires some more intensive analysis. Now, what's happening in general is that party registration is declining, but I'm sorry, party registration declined in Colorado, but across the board it increased. More for Democrats and Republicans and more for independents than either party. Overall, while total Democratic registration has been on the wane, recent data indicates that Democrats are registering more new voters than Republicans, and more new voters are registering as independents, which is a more diverse demographic and generally conceded to be more favorably Democratic. New registration tends to offset voters who switch parties as well as those who are dropped from the rolls because they didn't vote. These numbers are quite substantial. Catalyst data estimates that 300,000 Democrats have switched parties in Pennsylvania, Florida, and North Carolina, while 2.2 million have been removed from the rolls. So we're dealing with very big numbers in very important swing states. Each of those states could decide the election. Now here's the big picture. Republicans are advantaged by the change in the political landscape from 2010 on. Controlling governorships, controlling state houses, controlling congressional majorities means that you have a ready-made infrastructure for a presidential candidate. If that candidate actually has the backing of the party, in this cycle, that's not so evident. In fact, there's been a split or a schism between the Republican candidate and the Republican Party in many jurisdictions. By the same token, demographics in key swing states appear to favor Democrats based on registration data and the growing diversity of the electorate. So who gets to vote becomes a very, very important factor, and we went discussed that already. Let's just review it very briefly. Election law and surmounting the hurdles of voter ID, getting the candidate on the ballot and getting the base to the polls. You've got to get your base to the polls or you're not going to win the election. So we mentioned the Supreme Court overturning Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act in 1965 in Shelby County, mandating pre-clearance for covered jurisdictions, states that had a well-founded history of voting discrimination. For more than a half a century, the act was the gold standard in mandating pre-clearance. But now the burden has been shifted to the Justice Department, which has to challenge every little change that some red state legislature passes. And this requires a lot of time and effort and litigation in federal court, in appeals court, and in some cases it goes all the way to the Supreme Court. So the Republicans, without being biased, are operating or have taken a position that is to their advantage to make voting as the procedure to vote as strict as possible. Pennsylvania imposed strict voter ID, Ohio curtailed early voting, and Florida purged a large number of people on the rolls, as did New York by accident. In the presidential primary, they dropped the ball, and about 125,000 voters went up in smoke. So all of these states listed here have been involved in litigation with the Justice Department. Wisconsin, North Carolina, Texas, Kansas, 36,000 eligible voters prevented from registering. Now the methods of voting, I'll just conclude here. The Help America Vote Act in 2002 was supposed to provide funds to get the latest voting equipment and train people. Right now the U.S. is unique in that it has a pop-up workforce. There's no official civil service election service. So each state operates its own election according to its own laws, its own machines, and elections are actually conducted at the county level by a county board of elections, which decides where machines should be placed and what the where they should, how many machines, and all of that can impact on the ability to vote. For example, in the presidential primary in Arizona, they closed down 2/3 of their polling sites, and people were waiting hours and hours, and many of them never got to vote. Now, none of these systems are foolproof. Optical scanners can break down. They need to have paper trails. A ballot box can be tampered with. A lever machine can be tampered with. A ballot box can be stuffed. And it doesn't take much to change the results of an election. An election in which 100 million people will participate, even at a rate of 1/10 of 1%, is 100,000. So let's just look ahead very briefly. The first Tuesday after the first Monday in November, that's coming up on November 8th, the winning candidate is declared president-elect, assembles a staff, and is provided an office space to begin this transition, which lasts approximately 2.5 months. However, his election is not formally confirmed until each state's electors cast their votes on a given day, which is the first Wednesday after the second Monday in December. This year it falls, I think, on December 18th, at which date the results of the tally by states are sent to the Capitol and addressed to the sitting vice president, who reads them out on the floor on January 6th. And that person is then declared president, formally declared president-elect, to be inaugurated on January 20th. Thank you. On the west steps of the Capitol. That's it.